Most conventional corporate professionals operate under the naive, psychological delusion that loyalty to an enterprise guarantees security, believing that if you sacrifice your personal life, optimize their back-end databases, and maintain flawless operational consistency, the institution will protect your interests during a structural crisis, but they are completely blind to the cold reality of the executive matrix. To a multi-billion-dollar global banking conglomerate, a brilliant technical mind is nothing more than a highly efficient, completely disposable asset component to be utilized until a compliance anomaly threatens the leadership tier. At exactly 10 p.m. on a rain-slicked Tuesday evening, I sat in the glass headquarters of Vanguard Holdings in New York, discovering that the chief operating officer and the managing directors had systematically routed $400 million in unhedged derivative losses through my private risk assessment terminal, transforming me into the perfect administrative scapegoat for their upcoming federal regulatory audit. My name is Marcus Vance, and I did not react to this catastrophic corporate betrayal with an emotional outburst, a dramatic human resources complaint, or a pathetic plea for institutional fairness. One possessed a hyper-focused clinical mathematical intellect that allowed me to view their coordinated smear campaign as a simple optimization problem waiting to be solved by an architect. The senior executive team called me into a private boardroom the following morning, flanked by a dozen high-priced litigation attorneys, presenting me with a pre-drafted resignation manifest that stripped me of my vested equity options and accused me of gross negligence. They believed that by terminating my placement and destroying my professional reputation within the financial sector, they could permanently bury the paper trail of their own fraudulent transaction loops. I signed the document with a perfectly flat expression, shook their hands calmly, and walked out of the building, fully aware that my private cryptographic key was still embedded in the root terminal architecture of their central asset database. When you decide to execute a multi-phase corporate liquidation campaign against a legacy financial institution, you must first construct an invisible infrastructure that operates completely outside their security firewalls. I relocated to a minimalist loft apartment in Brooklyn, ice-skating 20 high-speed virtual private networks in a standalone terminal structure that left 0 digital fingerprints on the public routing tables. I didn't just audit their public financial statements, I used my backdoor system access to map out every single private trust account, offshore shell company, and automated liquidity pipeline controlled by the 5 executive officers who had orchestrated my eviction. I discovered that their entire personal net worth was heavily concentrated in unrestricted corporate share pools backed by the artificial valuation of Vanguard Holdings, meaning that if the primary corporate asset base experienced a sudden, uncontrolled structural desynchronization, their family wealth would evaporate before their trading desks could execute a sell order. The execution of a flawless, systemic revenge strategy requires you to understand the specific psychological vulnerabilities of your targets, ensuring they remain completely blind to the operational trap until the closing sequence is initiated. The chief operating officer, Arthur Sterling, was a man consumed by immense institutional arrogance, an individual who believed that his family heritage and his network of political contacts made him completely untouchable by the technical staff. Arthur spent his mornings hosting opulent lifestyle presentations for international investors, utilizing my stolen risk assessment algorithms to project an illusion of absolute financial stability, while his actual operational capital reserve was running on a critically dangerously low margin. Quietly deployed a recursive script into the primary clearing nodes, a software ghost that would slowly, imperceptibly alter the latency of his transaction verifications, causing his trading floor to accumulate microscopic settlement errors that would trigger an automatic regulatory red flag the exact moment our secondary short positions were fully funded. You never engage in a corporate warfare sequence without possessing the massive financial saturation required to sustain your market momentum against their institutional counterattacks. I collaborated with a group of cynical sovereign wealth funds in Zurich that had spent years looking for a structural vulnerability inside Vanguard's international market positioning. I presented them with a line-by-line quantitative analysis of the hidden derivative deficits Arthur Sterling had attempted to conceal using my terminal. When the Swiss fund managers realized that the data was absolute and undebatable, they granted me confidential access to a $12 billion short-selling allocation pool, allowing me to build an immense invisible market position that would profit exponentially from the complete destruction of Vanguard's public stock value. We didn't require an investment banking authorization because we built our swap blocks through independent, decentralized liquidity networks outside the jurisdiction of Wall Street. Asterisk, they always assume that, because you have been removed from the physical building, your capacity to interface with the primary machine has been completely neutralized. During my 5 years as the chief risk architect at Vanguard, I had designed their central electronic transaction ledger to utilize a custom encryption architecture that required a continuous cryptographic heartbeat verification from my private terminal node to maintain its optimal throughput velocity. After my forced departure, the engineering team they hired to replace me attempted to bypass my code parameters, completely blind to the reality that I had hidden a secondary cascading dependency loop inside the core compiled repository. The moment they initiated their annual multi-billion-dollar institutional refinancing round, the dependency loop automatically activated, causing their reported capital reserve metrics to drop by exactly 45% inside the federal clearing house monitors, sending an immediate wave of panic through their primary debt underwriters. Asterisk. The true beauty of an algorithmic counterstrike is that the target's desperate attempts to save themselves will always accelerate their own systemic destruction. Arthur Sterling sat in his glass executive suite, watching the sudden, unexplained drop in his corporate liquidity indicators with a rising, uncontrollable anxiety. He did not realize that my short-selling collective was simultaneously dumping millions of shares of Vanguard stock onto the secondary European exchanges, driving the public equity value down by 12% in a single pre-market trading session. Arthur attempted to execute an emergency capital injection by drawing down on his private offshore trust accounts, but my recursive script had already locked the clearing interface, flagging his international fund transfers as high-risk money laundering anomalies under the automated banking compliance protocols, leaving his accounts frozen at the exact moment he required immediate liquidity to stave off a public margin call. Asterisk. The absolute satisfaction of corporate retribution is not achieved by engaging in a loud public confrontation, it is delivered through the cold, silent viewing of a financial dashboard as your enemy's authority bleeds out in real time. On a Thursday afternoon at exactly 3 p.m., the board of directors at Vanguard called an emergency closed-door meeting to address the sudden, catastrophic collapse of their market capitalization. Arthur Sterling stood at the front of the marble table, his corporate composure completely shattered, his face an ash-gray color as he tried to explain to the primary investors why their automated risk management systems were refusing to clear their institutional debt obligations. He pleaded for additional time to execute a restructuring plan, completely unaware that the individual who had designed the entire ledger was currently sitting in a Brooklyn loft, watching his psychological disintegration through a live network feed. Asterisk. When an arrogant corporate titan finally realizes that his entire professional empire is being systematically liquidated by an invisible adversary, his predatory instinct dissolves into pure, desperate compliance. Arthur Sterling's private secretary called my unlisted line at midnight, presenting an urgent invitation from the executive board to return to the company as a special restructuring consultant, offering a massive multi-million-dollar compensation package and a full reinstatement of my historical equity blocks. They wanted me to fix the system. They wanted me to save their bonuses. They wanted the architect to crawl back into his cage and repair the machine they had broken. I listened to her frantic message on speakerphone while reviewing the final market sell orders. smiled my coldest smile and deleted the audio file from my network cache without responding. You cannot negotiate with an extraction algorithm that has already crossed the point of no return. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The final act of an institutional execution is completed when the federal regulators officially terminate the trading privileges of the corporation, declaring its entire asset structure completely insolvent on the public record at exactly 9:30 a.m. on Friday morning. The Securities and Exchange Commission issued an absolute trading freeze on Vanguard Holdings, citing a systemic failure of their compliance verification engines and an unhedged $400 million capital deficit. The corporate logo was stripped from the front of the Manhattan skyscraper by a team of liquidation workers within 48 hours? While Arthur Sterling and his managing directors were escorted out of the building by federal law enforcement officers to face criminal fraud indictments. They had tried to use me as a disposable variable, but the math had responded by processing their names through the dilution matrix until their legacy was reduced to absolute zero. Asterisk, true strategic dominance is achieved when the legal system itself becomes nothing more than a secondary mechanism that validates the outcome of your digital execution sequence. During the federal grand jury hearings in Manhattan, the prosecution presented 60,000 pages of automated transaction logs that my private server network had quietly delivered to their compliance boxes via an anonymous cryptographic drop. The data blocks were so clean, so precise, and so mathematically undebatable that the defense lawyers couldn't even present a basic administrative objection to the evidence. Arthur Sterling sat at the defense table, his expensive bespoke suit looking completely hollow as he realized that every single private email, deleted text message, and offshore transaction ledger he had used to frame me had been permanently burned into the public court record by the architect he had discarded. Asterisk. We are systematically lied to by corporate management consultants who tell us that human leadership is the primary driver of institutional value inside a modern financial enterprise. A company is nothing more than a collective data pipeline running through a legal framework, and if you control the technical integrity of that pipeline, you hold an absolute non-negotiable monopoly over the human beings who claim to run the boardroom. We didn't just destroy Vanguard Holdings to satisfy a personal desire for vengeance. We executed the liquidation to demonstrate a fundamental law of the digital economy. Capital can purchase the skyscrapers, capital can buy the political influence, and capital can hire the lawyers, but when the dark hits the infrastructure, the entire machine will always submit to the sovereign authority of the person who wrote the master source code. Asterisk. The resolution of an industrial insurgency is marked by the complete evaporation of emotional noise from the spaces where you build your independent future. I sit in my minimalist Brooklyn loft, looking out at the Manhattan skyline across the river, and I feel absolutely nothing but a deep, clean sense of operational clarity. The short-selling transaction accounts have all been settled. Our Swiss investment collective has cleared a net profit of $3 billion from the collapse of Vanguard. And my personal acquisition fund has quietly purchased the intellectual property rights and core database architecture of my former employer from the bankruptcy courts for less than 0.5% of its historical valuation. I am no longer an employee inside their matrix. I am the absolute owner of the infrastructure they use to oppress me. And the game is running entirely on my terms. Asterisk. The most deceptive narrative pitched to young professionals by the corporate establishment is the idea that compliance with a toxic management structure is a form of professional maturity. It is a magnificent psychological trap designed to strip you of your sovereign equity before your personal competency can achieve natural market dominance. The moment you allow an executive officer to diminish your value or manipulate your technical logs, you are trading your long-term independence for a temporary salary that carries zero structural authority. We built our new quantitative research collective by explicitly rejecting the traditional hierarchy of Wall Street, hiring exclusively brilliant, insubordinate engineers who refuse to play boardroom politics, giving them absolute equity ownership, over the algorithms they commit to our central master repository, *true. Corporate security is achieved when you design an executive structure that makes it mathematically impossible for an activist investor or a corrupt board of directors to access your internal operational frameworks. During the formation of our new digital asset collective, our legal team established an unscannable corporate holding network across 5 sovereign jurisdictions. Utilizing a dual-class cryptographic equity framework that grants my private key absolute majority voting control over every platform deployment, system expansion, and capital allocation. The legacy venture capital funds can purchase our dividend streams on the private secondary exchanges if they desire. But they can never demand an executive audit. They can never install a puppet manager into our offices, and they can never fire the architect who runs the console, the ultimate validation of your technical counterstrike. Guess is recorded on the historical capitalization charts of the financial sector, where the sudden vertical drop of your enemy's asset line remains permanently preserved as a statistical warning to future executive teams. I keep a live high-resolution display of Vanguard's terminal liquidation sequence running on a secondary screen in my laboratory, a clean, elegant red line that plunges off a cliff into absolute infinity. It functions as a monument to mathematical inevitability. Arthur Sterling brought a corporate checkbook and an inheritance network to an engineering fight, and the system responded by processing his assets through the dilution matrix until he was nothing more than a historical footnote in a bankruptcy brief, proving that the person who writes the algorithm always dictates the reality of the exchange. When the regional regulatory commissions realize they cannot legally halt your market penetration, they will always attempt to deploy an army of administrative auditors to bury your development floor under a continuous mountain of compliance paperwork. We received a formal mandate from the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority demanding a complete line-by-line documentation audit of our global automated derivative execution code. I didn't assign our core engineering staff to compile the logs. I wrote a recursive script that automatically generated 400 million pages of raw, unindexed machine code, delivering the data to their offices via an automated digital transfer that completely crashed their internal network servers. We answered their audit with total compliance, but we delivered the compliance at a technical velocity that exposed their complete structural incompetence. The ultimate form of professional security is reached when your organization has achieved such a level of technological saturation that your competitors cannot even identify the physical location of the personnel who are actively running the platform. We transitioned our primary architecture division from our visible New York loft to a completely decentralized, encrypted dark network protocol. Our top 80 engineers operate from anonymous locations across 20 different countries, communicating exclusively through private cryptographic keys and rotating virtual terminals. They do not possess corporate titles, they do not appear on our public organizational charts, and they do not have listings on LinkedIn. They exist entirely as ghosts inside the server architecture, making it absolutely impossible for our rivals to headhunt our talent or map out our product roadmap. True maturity is achieved the exact moment you stop seeking the validation of the people who attempted to exploit your early technical vulnerability. I sat across from the senior managing director of a legacy Wall Street investment bank during our pre-IPO roadshow in London. He was dressed in a pristine bespoke suit, holding an analytical report that classified our engineering culture as highly unconventional and potentially volatile. Mr. Vance, your platform lacks a traditional corporate governance framework. How can we assure our institutional investors that your leadership is stable? I looked at his analytical report, smiled, and slid it back across the table. Your institutional investors aren't purchasing my stability director. They are purchasing access to a database that currently controls the transaction flow of 400 million consumers. If they don't like the governance, they can buy bonds, asterisk, 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 asterisk. If you are sitting inside a corporate cubicle right now, listening to this script through your headphones, while an arrogant manager adjusts his luxury watch and demands your compliance on an uncompensated project, open your eyes to the mathematical reality. You are not a subordinate asset inside an institutional matrix. You are an entire trading engine that has simply chosen to sell its velocity for a flat salary, because you haven't yet calculated the true power of your independence. Document your routing scripts, analyze the latency of your company's infrastructure, and when the exact moment of market desynchronization occurs, have the absolute courage to take your box and walk out of the skyscraper, leave them with their country clubs, leave them with their credentials, and let their blue-chip stock crash to absolute zero. Because the wolf doesn't belong in a corporate cage, it belongs on the floor. Running the entire soundtrack, asterisk, the absolute baseline of a successful long-term industrial infiltration relies entirely on the continuous extraction of operational system logs before your targets even comprehend that an audit has been initiated. I spent my second month in exile writing an automated file scraping protocol that ran silently within Vanguard's secondary backup servers in Virginia. Every single evening, at exactly 4 minutes past the closing bell, my protocol compressed the daily trading manifests, internal risk memos, and encrypted executive chat histories into a single container file, routing it through 5 layers of anonymous proxy nodes before landing on my encrypted storage drive in Brooklyn. Arthur Sterling continued to believe he was operating in absolute secrecy, completely blind to the reality that his entire corporate timeline was being systematically duplicated onto my terminal every 24 hours. Asterisk, we are continuously conditioned by mainstream financial media outlets to view senior corporate executives as hyper-intelligent strategic visionaries who possess a deep innate understanding of global market mechanics. But the data logs from my internal extraction sequence revealed an entirely different reality of systemic incompetence and profound operational ignorance. Arthur Sterling and his immediate managing directors didn't understand the basic mathematical constraints of the high-velocity derivative portfolios they were approving for the public markets. They were merely institutional salesmen who relied entirely on the technical labor of underpaid quantitative engineers to sustain their illusions of corporate competence. They spent their afternoons drinking expensive wine at elite clubs, while their underlying capital reserves were actively decaying under the weight of unhedged risk exposure. Asterisk. When a legacy financial conglomerate realizes its internal liquidity indicators have been permanently compromised by a hidden structural variable, their first defensive instinct is to attempt to utilize their legal department to execute a confidential financial suppression agreement. Senior corporate litigation partner from Vanguard arrived at my Brooklyn loft without a prior appointment, carrying a leather briefcase containing a formal $20 million settlement offer and a lifetime non-disclosure contract. He sat on my minimalist wooden bench, adjusted his gold cufflinks, and explained that the firm was prepared to wipe my regulatory record clean if I would deliver the master decryption keys to the central ledger repository. I looked at the settlement documents for 3 seconds, walked to my terminal, and executed a live market sell order of 50,000 shares of Vanguard stock directly in front of his face. The price just dropped another $2, counselor, I said quietly. You should probably call your office before your corporate card declines. Asterisk true. Systemic leverage is achieved when you turn your enemy's internal compliance department into an automated execution squad that destroys the leadership tier from within. The organization I didn't send my extracted fraud logs to a public news outlet or an anonymous financial blog. I quietly injected the unredacted transaction files directly into the internal automated audit system of Vanguard's primary European clearing bank. The bank's sovereign compliance algorithms immediately detected the multi-million-dollar reporting discrepancies, triggering an automatic non-negotiable freeze on Vanguard's international currency exchange channels within 12 seconds of ingestion. Arthur Sterling woke up on a Monday morning to discover that his company could no longer process foreign transaction orders. Completely paralyzed by the very compliance architecture he had built to protect his empire, the most complex operational challenge of executing a multi-billion-dollar COA RATE liquidation campaign is the physical preservation of your capital. Liquidity while the surrounding market infrastructure is collapsing into absolute chaos. I flew to Zurich during the third week of the panic sequence, meeting with the senior managing directors of the sovereign wealth fund that had backed my initial short allocations. We sat inside a private high-security boardroom overlooking the lake, verifying the margin acceleration metrics of our credit default swap contracts. The Swiss bankers were absolutely stunned by the precision of my predictive algorithms, realizing that our short position had effectively captured 94% of the downward momentum of the North American Technology Index. We finalized the conversion parameters, shifting our profits into hard sovereign bonds that could not be diluted by any federal central bank interventions, The ultimate satisfaction of institutional revenge is observing the physical liquidation of the luxury status symbols your enemies utilize to project their unearned authority over your career. Following the official bankruptcy declaration of Vanguard Holdings, the federal asset recovery teams initiated an immediate, unrestricted foreclosure campaign against the private real estate holdings of the executive board, Arthur Sterling's multi-million-dollar penthouse apartment in Manhattan, his luxury coastal estate in the Hamptons, and his private collection of imported sports vehicles were systematically cataloged and sold to the highest bidder at a public auction held inside a crowded federal warehouse. I attended the auction dressed in a simple dark hoodie, utilizing an anonymous corporate entity to purchase Arthur's private executive desk for less than $400 in cash, using it as a server stand in my new Brooklyn laboratory, We are continuously lied to by mainstream network security firms, who tell us that a corporate database can be rendered completely secure through the installation of expensive hardware firewalls and complex access permissions. A security system is only as reliable as the human compliance of the executives who hold the master administrative keys. I managed to maintain my unrestricted access to Vanguard's core repository simply because Arthur Sterling had written his master system on a physical notepad kept inside his top desk drawer. A detail I had cataloged during my final week of employment, the most sophisticated digital infrastructure on Earth was completely compromised by the simple, lazy human arrogance of the man who claimed to run the company, proving that the wolf doesn't need to break down the laboratory door when the director leaves the key under the mat, every evening at exactly midnight. Long after the financial news anchors have ceased their commentary and the public markets have fallen into absolute stillness, I activate my private root console to monitor the performance metrics of our new decentralized risk collective. Our platform does not rely on traditional corporate hierarchies, administrative assistance, or expensive marketing campaigns to secure its market positioning. We operate as a flat, highly automated engineering network that processes $400 billion in transactional data packets every single week. Generating an automated dividend stream for our independent developers, we have successfully replaced the entire legacy banking structure with a clean, self-optimizing software loop running in the cloud, proving that a well-written script beats 1,000 investment managers every day of the week. The ultimate validation of your structural rebellion occurs when the very academic institutions that train the legacy elites invite you to deliver the keynote address on the future of global market architecture. I stepped onto the main stage of the Stanford Graduate School of Business, looking out at an auditorium packed with 1,200 elite students dressed in pristine corporate attire. They sat with their laptops open, waiting to write down my principles of algorithmic leverage and systematic institutional liquidation. I didn't use a polished slide deck or repeat the standard venture capital platitudes. I looked directly at the front row and delivered the only truth that matters. Stop attempting to network your way into their boardrooms. Go home, open your terminal, and write a script that leaves their entire legacy asset structure completely obsolete. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The final act of an economic insurgency is reached when your corporate platform has achieved such a level of global saturation that the concept of competition itself is completely eliminated from the marketplace. We officially completed the acquisition of our last major international banking rival on a Friday afternoon, permanently migrating their user base to our centralized infrastructure and shutting down their server arrays. Our system was now processing 94% of all digital asset traffic on the planet. Our platform was no longer an application, it was the digital environment where modern society existed. We had successfully constructed an unbreakable intellectual property monopoly using nothing but a dorm room laptop and an uncompromised focus, proving that the person who writes the algorithm always dictates the reality. Asterisk. People within the financial space frequently study our capitalization table as if it were a magical anomaly in the history of Wall Street, writing academic case studies for Harvard Business School about our liquidation strategy and our executive transition timelines. But there was no magic involved, it was a clinical, cold exercise in total data sovereignty. The old guard institutions spent a century believing that the person who controlled the capital controlled the asset. But they forgot that in a digitized world, the source code is the ultimate asset. If you possess the technical capacity to build the engine, you hold an absolute, non-negotiable monopoly over the human beings who want to ride in the car. They can hire the lawyers, they can draft the contracts, and they can stage the boardrooms, but when the dark hits the infrastructure, they will always be forced to crawl back to the root administrator to request an access token. Asterisk. The most deceptive narrative pitched to young developers by the Silicon Valley elite is the idea that venture capital backing is a form of professional validation. It is a magnificent psychological trap designed to strip you of your sovereign equity before your product can achieve natural market dominance. The moment you accept that initial seed check, you are inviting a board of directors into your server room. Individuals whose only utility is to inflate the short-term valuation of your platform so they can flip their shares to a larger fund during the next round. They don't care about your technological vision, they don't care about your engineering floor, they are simply financial scalpers who view your life's work as a high-yield leverage vehicle. We built Vanguard infrastructure by explicitly rejecting their capital until we possessed the mathematical scale to dictate our own evaluation terms. Asterisk. True corporate maturity is achieved the exact moment you stop seeking the validation of the people who attempted to exploit your early technical vulnerability. I sat across from the senior managing director of a legacy Wall Street investment bank during our pre-IPO roadshow in London. He was dressed in a pristine bespoke suit, holding an analytical report that classified our engineering culture as highly unconventional and potentially volatile. Mr. Vance, your platform lacks a traditional corporate governance framework. How can we assure our institutional investors that your leadership is stable? I looked at his analytical report, smiled, and slid it back across the table. Your institutional investors aren't purchasing my stability director. They are purchasing access to a database that currently controls the attention span of 400 million active consumers. If they don't like the governance, they can buy government bonds. Asterisk, the core engine of modern financial domination relies entirely on the continuous automated extraction of behavioral data from a defenseless consumer population. While our competitors were busy trying to sell physical products or manage traditional inventory distribution channels, our platform was harvesting the digital fingerprints, preference loops, and communication networks of half the planet. We didn't require a manufacturing plant or a raw material supply chain. Our users were voluntarily creating our content, maintaining our infrastructure, and inviting their friends into our database entirely for free. We turned the concept of human attention into a highly lucrative commodity that could be packaged, segmented, and auctioned off to global corporations within 4 milliseconds of user interaction. We didn't just build an application, we successfully constructed the primary digital tax grid of the 21st century, asterisk. The ultimate resolution of your past conflicts occurs when the geographic locations where you experienced your initial vulnerability are completely transformed by your corporate expansion. I returned to Boston 3 years after my departure, not to attend a university reunion or apologize to my former classmates, but to sign the final lease acquisition documents for a new 50,000 square foot quantitative research facility located directly across the street from Eduardo's family banking offices. The old institutional elites who had looked down on my university operation were now standing in line to submit their engineering resumes to our human resources division. They had spent their lives following the conventional, sanitized rules of the establishment, only to discover that the establishment itself had been entirely purchased by the antisocial hacker they had excluded from their dining clubs, asterisk every evening at exactly midnight. Long after the corporate executive assistants have cleared my schedule, and the public relations team has gone home, I activate my private root console from a standalone terminal that sits in the corner of my office. I don't review marketing reports or analyze user acquisition metrics. I look at the raw server latency logs running across our global network cores in Dublin, Singapore, and Virginia. I write custom micro-optimizations directly into the primary routing tables, ensuring that our data packets remain the fastest-moving infrastructure on the planet. This is the place where my power originates, not in the board resolutions, not in the venture funding rounds, and certainly not in the opinions of the financial press. The empire belongs to the person who can still interface with the machine. When the lights are turned off, asterisk the ultimate validation of a corporate Counter-Strike is recorded on the historical capitalization ledger of your holding corporation, where the signatures of your former detractors remain permanently attached to their reduced equity percentages. I keep a framed copy of our series, a reorganization document, hanging behind my desk, displaying Eduardo Sterling's signature right next to the decimal point that represents his current ownership stake, 0.03%. It is a clean, elegant monument to mathematical inevitability. He brought a checkbook to an engineering fight, and the system responded by processing his capital through the dilution matrix until he was nothing more than an expensive footnote. You can either be the architect who writes the code, or you can be the asset that gets processed by the algorithm. There is no third option on this exchange, asterisk. The modern global economy is not a collection of sovereign nation-states managing geographic borders. It is a highly competitive landscape of private corporate networks fighting for absolute domain sovereignty over the global data pipelines. When a foreign regulatory commission attempted to execute an administrative freeze on our localized database centers, alleging that our data collection models violated their regional privacy statutes, I didn't hire a political lobbyist or submit to their compliance hearings. I executed an immediate, automated data rerouting sequence through our maritime server nodes, completely bypassing their regional network architecture and rendering their administrative freeze entirely unenforceable within 45 seconds. We proved that digital infrastructure operates at a velocity that leaves regional legislation completely obsolete, asterisk. True systemic innovation is never generated by a committee of well-mannered corporate professionals. Following a standardized operational handbook, it is captured exclusively by the antisocial cohorts, the eccentric engineers, and the hyper-focused outcasts who are completely incapable of playing traditional boardroom politics. At our Palo Alto development facility, we built an elite engineering division called the Ghost Lab, filling it entirely with brilliant, unformatted programmers who had been expelled from conventional universities or blacklisted by mainstream tech firms for technical insubordination. We paid them exclusively in sovereign equity options, removed all administrative deadlines from their schedules, and gave them one simple instruction: find the structural flaws in our competitors' architecture and build a machine that tears them down from the inside out. Asterisk. If you are sitting inside a corporate cubicle right now, Listening to this script through your headphones while an arrogant manager adjusts his luxury watch and demands your compliance on an uncompensated project. Open your eyes to the mathematical reality. You are not a subordinate asset inside an institutional matrix. You are an entire engineering engine that has simply chosen to sell its velocity for a flat salary. Because you haven't yet calculated the true power of your independence, document your routing scripts, analyze the latency of your company's infrastructure, and when the exact moment of market desynchronization occurs, have the absolute courage to take your box and walk out of the skyscraper. Leave them with their country clubs, leave them with their credentials, and let their blue chip stock crash. 2. Absolute zero. Because the wolf doesn't belong in a corporate cage, he belongs on the floor, running the entire soundtrack. Asterisk, 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 asterisk.